three critical steps that I believe are absolutely essential for you to ace your next interview. Now, there's tons of advice out there on how to do the interviewing. Um, Unfortunately, I feel that most of the advice is really meant for people that are going to hang out and have a cup of tea with somebody else, or maybe just some basic corporate interviews. But in my opinion, you can really turn the interview to go to your direction. So just real quickly, a little bit more about myself and what I do. In fact, what I'll try to do here without screwing things up too much is turn on the camera so you see that I'm an actual human being, which, you know, I'm not sure if you believe me or not, but it's a true story. I am. Here we go. Let me stop the screen share and, oh, so here I am. My hair is a little messy because I was freaking out trying to get this thing all cranking. But again, my name is Mark Moyer. I've been an executive recruiter for over 25 years. It's amazing to say that, but it's absolutely true. And on top of that, I've been coaching professionals just like you for, oh, I don't know, maybe just about that time. And what really is important to me is the whole concept of really drilling down and finding out what it is you love to do, where you love to do it, and where you really, most importantly, want to do it. And try to give you tips and strategies that will get you there a heck of a lot faster than you might do it by getting a lot of the, a lot of the information that's tends to be kind of on the, maybe on the free side or the cheap side, whether it's on the internet or on LinkedIn and so on. So just wanted to give you a quick glance at who I was to show you that, yes, I am real and I am a sort of human on occasion. And we're going to try to get back to the screen share here so you can see the slides again. So here we go. So again, let me just make sure I get the next slide up. So before I get cranking along on this topic real quick, I wanted to tell you briefly about my upcoming webinar that I promise won't get too many goofs like we did here. It's going to be in a couple weeks on April 7th. I'm going to try doing it a couple different times at noon and at 5:30. It'll be pretty much the same content. I'll just do it twice. But we're going to be talking about navigating the post-interview follow-up. I mean, look, today we're talking about the 3 steps to really kick butt in the interview. And to me, look, at the end of the day, I want you to be the one that gets the offer and not your competition, right? So there are several ways to do that, but the most important way is to effectively be the one that survives the process, right? It's not always the what do you call it? The person that's the smartest, the tallest, the best looking, whatever it is. It's simply the person that survives the whole process, right? So my upcoming webinar is going to be all about navigating the post-interview, assuming that you do well in the interview process. Well, look, how do you follow up with these people? How do you get it so that you close the deal with them and you start negotiating terms and so on? So that's the most important point. Before I go much further, just any quick questions on your end, throw them in the text box there. And I'm going to take a little sip of water in 1 sec. So let me ask you this. In terms of the things that have happened to you, I'd like you to put in the chat box here if any of these following have happened to you and what have been the results. So, for example, if you've come in second, third, or fourth in the process, in other words, if you've heard from your hiring managers, the recruiters you've been involved with, and so forth, gee, Mark, I came in, you came in second, you came in third, you came in fourth. I mean, that's pretty devastating, right? And or if you're dealing directly with an underqualified interviewer, meaning what I mean by that is somebody who's just asking you the most ridiculous questions. They're not really paying attention to who you are. They're not looking at your resume. They're just not the right person to be interviewing you. Also, if they're asking you questions that are really, really difficult to answer, or if you don't really know what kind of questions to ask the interviewer. Or lastly, of course, if you ever struggle to figure out, well, how do you close a deal? How do you actually make it so that you're the one getting the offer, right? Now, I know there was a little snafu here. We talked about this already, Chris and Mike and so on. So going back to these questions here, let me know in the chat box if any of these situations have ever happened to you. If you've ever come in second, third, or fourth and just wondered why. Let me know in there. All right, so today what I'm going to talk about real quickly is how you can prepare for each segment of the interview, how to develop and maintain the synergy with the interviewer, how to take control, which is absolutely essential, taking control of the interview, also showing the interviewer, hey, look, you're the person for the job, right? And really how to answer those tough questions. And lastly, of course, closing the deal. Now, these are all things that you're going to learn today. Now, just real quickly, obviously, you've already seen a little bit of a technological snafu. My audio went out for a sec. There have been a couple of other issues here and there. But look, whenever you get a chance, jump in the chat box and feel free to ask a question or two. Also, I guess if you hear continued sound issues or visual issues, please let me know. And I will be giving away at the end of this webinar, I'm going to ask a question and be giving away at the end of the webinar a coaching session worth, give or take $400. So I look forward to doing that. I'm going to ask a question that's based on some of the stuff you're going to be hearing today. So try to really focus and we'll get going. So why do you feel, first of all, let me take a step back. Can everybody hear me right now? Just throw a quick yes in the box. So why is it important to prepare properly for the interview? I mean, look, in my opinion, preparation for the interview is absolutely essential. When people say, hey, look, Mark, I'm preparing for the interview and so on, what does that usually mean? Well, a lot of times it means people go on to company websites. They, I don't know, they find out what the companies make. They do a little bit more research. But does that really mean they're prepared properly? So I think it's critical that you really learn how to take over and maintain control over the interview, and you do it subtly. And you're going to get a lot of typical questions, right? You're going to get questions like, where do you see yourself in 4 years? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why did you leave company A to go to company B? But it's important that you anticipate always what the hiring manager is looking for, that you always put yourself in their shoes, and you really try to identify some of the questions that you're going to be asked and also how to ask them, right? So step number one, and start doing lots of furious note-taking, because I'm going to go through a lot of this fairly quickly. I apologize for having used up a lot of time earlier, so I'm going to throw a lot at you today. Number one, the first critical step is to always put yourself in their shoes and their brain. And I'm talking about the hiring manager, right? I want you to think about the position you're interviewing for. And once you've done that, really take out a yellow pad of paper and pretend you're the hiring manager and think to yourself, okay, if I'm this person, what are some of the essential things I'm looking for? What are the skills, the capabilities, the personality traits that I find are absolutely essential for this position? Now, you can't cheat and you can't pretend you're you, right? You can't do that. You've got to always, again, pretend you are the hiring manager. And let's say, for example, uh, the hiring manager is looking to interview maybe, for argument's sake, 7 or 8 candidates. Let's say it's 8 candidates, and you're one of those 8. Well, if you're the hiring manager and you're interviewing 8 people, how do you go from 8 to 1, right? Well, it's sort of a process of elimination, right? It's almost like that TV show Survivor, where you need to survive till the end. We talked about that earlier. But they're going to be asking all the candidates the same type of stuff. They need to find out if the candidates have, for example, let's say they have strong analytical skills, or they have strong product knowledge, or processes, or they're strong project managers, or they're good in a certain type of computer system and program, or they have the right personality to be, let's say, a salesperson. But the hiring manager is probably going to go into these interviews with a list of skills and capabilities that they're really looking for. So what I want you to do is, before your interview, make a list of all the things that you would ask all the candidates for that position. And even if it's something where you might not have something that might be on that list, it's okay. I want you to anticipate all the things the manager might be looking for. Okay? And once you've made that list of all those things, well, then think to yourself, well, all right, now I know all the things I'm looking for, but how do I find out if these candidates have that? So then what you do is you start writing down some questions of really how you would ask the candidates those questions. So, for example, if it's something tied in with project management, well, then how do you ask those people, well, do you have project management experience? No. You might say, give me an instance in your background where you ran a project that had a successful ending and it came in under budget or under time and so forth, right? Or if you really want someone who's definitely a team player, right? I'm sure everyone's heard that before. Well, don't ask, are you a team player? You might ask instead, give me an instance where you worked together with a group to get to a positive ending in a project and so on, right? So what I want you to do is also make a list of all the questions you would ask the 8 candidates, all of them. Just make a list of all these things. And then I want you to write down how you would answer those questions. I mean, how you'd want them to be answered if you were that manager, right? So, people say, well, gee, that's a lot to write all that stuff down. But when you write something down, number one, you certainly think about it as you prepare. But number two, when you write down an answer, you're likely to make it shorter and to the point and concise, right? It's not going to go on and on and on. So before I go much further, does this make sense? Just put a yes in the box and we'll keep cranking along here. Now, with that step one again, that was all about preparing for really anticipating what the hiring manager is looking for out of all the candidates, right? And writing down all those elements, anticipating the questions that hiring manager might ask everybody, all right? So the next step, step 2, is really preparing for the process of elimination, which I talked about earlier. And what I'm saying here is, what would you ask yourself if you put yourself on the defensive? What I mean by that is this. If I'm that hiring manager and I'm interviewing these 8 people, obviously I can't hire all 8, and I can't hire 7 or 6 of them. I can't even hire 2. I can only hire 1. Or I might not hire anybody if they all kind of stink, right? So how do I figure out, geez, Out of these 8 people, how do I really narrow it down? Well, I'd probably look at all their backgrounds, their resumes, their LinkedIn profiles, etc., and jot down questions that I would ask each one of them that I think would put them a little bit on the defensive, that would make them feel a little bit uncomfortable and basically get a feeling about how they'd react, right? I'd kind of be a little bit of a jerk in terms of trying to find out, well, what am I going to ask this person to see what the deal is about that? Now, do I really care about some of the stuff that happened in their background, in their lives, in their careers, and so on? Well, no, only if it has a direct impact on what I'm doing going forward. So, the bottom line is this. If I see a resume, for example, that has, let's say, 4 jobs in the last 4 years, right? Well, it's probable that I'm going to be concerned about that because I'm going to be thinking, well, this guy, Jim, he's had 4 jobs in 4 years. I'm wondering if this job, my job, is going to be the 5th job in 5, right? Or I might see that Susan was pursuing her MBA and then stopped after a year. Well, should I be concerned? Well, maybe not, but maybe so, because, who knows? Maybe that's just telling me that she's a quitter. She can't handle the pressure of getting her advanced degree. Who knows? So I'm going to be looking at everybody's backgrounds to see, well, what can I ask these people that will put them on the defensive? Because I'm really anxious to hear how they reply. It's not because I really care why Susan didn't finish her MBA. I don't care. I mean, it doesn't really impact me or my job necessarily. I don't care why Jim's had 4 jobs in 4 years necessarily, unless, again, this is going to be the 5th in 5, right? So I'm going to ask everyone questions that I want to see if it's going to have an impact going forward. So what I want you to do is take a really strong, honest, good, hard look at your background and your resume and think to yourself, I wonder what someone could ask me that would put me on the defensive. What could somebody ask me that, geez, I just hope they don't ask me that question. I hope they stay away from that. Please don't ask that question. I mean, I've known people, hundreds of people over the years, that are absolutely terrified of going into an interview because they don't want to be asked a specific question, right? So this step 2 is designed to eliminate that fear. It's to make it so you're totally comfortable. So the second bullet here, what is PNP? Well, let's say, for example, someone asks you, well, Jim, I see that you happened to be at Bank of America last year and you're no longer there now. What happened? Well, that would be one of those questions that people are usually afraid to answer because they'll start talking about a long layoff procedure, or they might say, well, I couldn't help it. I was caught up in this layoff, or my manager we didn't get along. And so I was one of the ones that was picked. And you just sort of going on and on about an excuse of what happened, right? Well, nobody wants to hear all that stuff. I really promise you, they don't. So the best way to answer a question like that, why are you no longer at Bank of America? I see it ended last month, is to answer every question as much as possible in the PNP format, which is positive, negative, positive. And the little n is a little negative. And what you're doing there is you're going to start off answering that question with a big positive statement where you say, well, my experience at Bank of America was fabulous. It was a great job. I got along great with the people. The work itself was really amazing. It was really quite cutting edge. And I had a great time while I was there. And even though they had to go through a little bit of a restructuring, which meant that I had to be downsized, it was really a fabulous experience. And quite frankly, a blessing in disguise, because it gave me the opportunity to interview for positions like this one here, where clearly you guys are at the top of your field. You're cutting edge as well. It seems like a great bunch of people here. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity if I'd still be working at Bank of America. And what you're doing there is you're completely surrounding the negative aspect of why you were downsized with positive terminology, positive statements. And that is what people remember in an answer. They will remember the fact that you started with a positive statement, you ended with a positive statement, and then you discuss that little negative part, but they're gonna remember that you answered the question, and they're gonna be thrilled that you did because you surrounded it with all that positive stuff. Now, it doesn't mean I'm all big, touchy feely huggy, whatever it is, kumbaya stuff. But when you get used to answering questions in a positive way, you will always be seen that way. People will think, well, here's a guy that looks at things in a positive light. Here's a guy who, this is the type of person we'd love to have here at our company. Somebody who will lift other people around him or her. Somebody who's doesn't take the negative stance on things. And look, I'm guessing that some of you have probably seen in the past and worked in the past with people that are just always seemingly negative, right? But from my perspective, if you're demonstrating that you can, I don't even know what the term is, turn a lemon into a sugar or whatever, something like that, that's going to get you hired a lot quicker. Now, also, when I say at the bottom, what would you not want to hear from a potential candidate? Keep in mind that there's such a tendency for people to go on and on and on, right? There's a tendency for, if someone asks a question, well, why did you, leave Bank of America, or why did this, 5 minutes later, they're still talking. And I promise you, the person asked the question, the interviewer, they may be looking at you and nodding your head and saying, oh, wow, that's so fascinating. But I promise you, they're thinking about what's for lunch or dinner, what they're going to be doing after work, what the Yankees are, what time is the game tonight, and so on. They're going to be thinking about something completely different, and sort of completely, you're losing them. You're totally losing them. So it's also essential that not only do you structure your answers as much as you can in a PMP format, especially if they're a negative connotation, but you also keep them brief and to the point, and you answer the question, and you keep things rolling. Look, the most successful interviews are the ones that become a conversation. And the ones that become a conversation first, instead of an interview, those are the people that get hired. Okay? So really try your best to focus on keeping your answers brief and to the point, keeping them in a positive light, and you'll find that you can walk into an interview, if you've properly prepared for both step 1 and step 2, you can walk into an interview now saying, bring it on. I'm ready for any question you'll throw at me. Now, I don't want you to actually say that, obviously, but I think you'll find that when you're confident like that and comfortable because you've prepared for all the questions that tie in with the position and all the, the elements, that the personality stuff and the skill set and everything else that you're ready for. And then you're ready for any questions that might have a negative connotation. Then you'll find that you're going to have a completely different frame of mind about the interview. You're going to go in a bunch more relaxed, easygoing, positive, enthusiastic, and it's going to absolutely reflect on your performance. I promise you. I've been doing this a long, long time, and when people are prepared like that, they always do a bunch better. They really do. So do me a favor and throw another yes in the box if this is making any sense. And please don't hesitate to ask me any questions if you've got something on your mind that you want to throw out there. Any comments about what you've heard? If some of the elements, it's okay if you disagree with something. Actually, it's not. You're not allowed to disagree with anything. I'm just kidding. But just give me a sense of not only if it all makes sense, but if you've got any questions going forward. And we'll keep cranking along here. So that's the second step. The third step is asking the right questions. How many times have you been in an interview where they say, well, Jim, well, Bob, well, Nancy, well, Sue, hey, do you have any questions for me? Well, all the time, right? And what does everybody usually ask if they have questions? A lot of times they'll say, no, you've covered everything, right? Which is a bad plan. Or they might say, well, yes, what is the daily, the daily ritual of someone in this position? Or, tell me more about the team, or tell me more about yourself. And they always ask questions that are sort of within what I call the interview box. They only ask stuff that's about the interview and the job. And I really want you to go outside of that box with these questions, okay? So first of all, really try to, before you go into this interview, really try to understand what the knowledge base of the interviewer is, what they really know, what they really can do well, and what they feel really comfortable with. And a great way to do that is to really investigate and look at their LinkedIn profile, because that will really show you a lot of the stuff, a lot of their interests, a lot of their professional affiliations, and so on. And really try to get to know that. And when I say ask their opinion, here's what you can do with the question. If, for example, this position is to become a lawyer, let's say a lawyer in-house at a bank, and in some sort of a capacity tied in with regulatory stuff. And you ask that person, well, Jim, actually, I do have a question. I know that, with a lot of the political stuff going on now and the upcoming election, there might be some concern amongst some people that Dodd-Frank might be overturned, or that the regulatory requirements that are in place today may be maybe turned upside down tomorrow. How do you think is that going to impact your group and your team, and where do you see it going? Well, what you're doing right there is you're asking Jim a question about the business, about the industry, about what he knows, his wheelhouse, the stuff that he lives and breathes every day. And then, best of all, you ask for his opinion. You ask him what he thinks. You ask him, where does he see things going down the road? And then you just stop and let him talk and talk and talk. Just let him answer. Because what's going to happen while he's talking is he's going to be thinking, wow, I'm meeting with this woman or this guy who really cares about what I think. This person really wants to hear my opinion. And these other 7 people that I met with today and yesterday, all they talked about was what they thought and what their opinion was. And instead, here's somebody who really wants to hear what I have to say. I hope, does that make sense? Or, uh, can you hear me again, or is it still out, folks? Put in a thing if you say you can hear the audio again. Okay, great. Sorry about that, guys. I have no idea why it's going in and out. I'm starting to think that maybe I've got some sort of plate in my head. But going back a couple notches here, the most essential thing is to really make sure you ask an industry or a job-related question that gets them completely engaged to answer you. So, for example, again, I might ask a question that gets them to talk about what they do for a living, what they are, and their opinion. So, for example, or if it's somebody in an auditing field, and you say to them, "Look, I read in the journal the other day that there's been an increased transparency in how people are releasing their numbers in the European countries because of what's going on with the blah 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 blah." And I would love to get your thoughts on how that's impacting your team. Well, looks like when you ask a question like that, and you ask a question that engages them in conversation about what they know, what they really do for a living, what their comfort level is, their expertise, what they love to talk about, which is really what they know a lot about. And when you ask their opinion and what they really think, and you get them talking about that. Let me take a step back. I know I've already repeated some of this stuff here, but when you ask somebody their opinion, it's the equivalent of walking into a restaurant or a bar or any sort of social thing, and instead of you saying, "Hey, here's what I think about politics," a specific candidate, Trump or Hillary or whatever it is. Well, the other person's going to be like, "Well, I don't really care," or maybe I'll listen, but I'm dying to talk about what my opinion is, right? But if you said, "Hey, Jim, great to see you. What's your opinion about the election?" Oh my God, will people be thrilled to answer you, right? So it's the same thing here, where instead of talking about your opinion, instead if you ask them for their opinion about something, then you're going to get them just talking and talking and talking. And while they're doing that, they're looking at you and thinking about you as, wow, here's somebody who respects my opinion. Here's somebody who wants to know what I think. This is just the type of person I want to hire. I want to hire somebody who is interested in what I think, what I have to say. I don't want to hire these other people that are just talking all the time about what their opinions are. I don't necessarily care about that. But here's somebody who really cares about what my perspective is, and I like that. Now, also, it's funny, a little, I'm one of these guys that, as you can tell, based on this webinar today, it's a little challenging for me to multitask. I'm not great at that. I'll admit that. But, one of the things that I also can't do, and please let me know if you can do it, but when I'm speaking, I'm keenly aware that right now you can be doing almost anything else. I hope you're listening, and I hope you're reading some of the slides and so on and taking notes. But you could be eating a sandwich, you could be folding laundry, you could be doing anything else, and I wouldn't necessarily know, right? Also, if I'm talking to you on the phone, or even if I'm talking to you in person, while I'm talking, I don't necessarily know if you're really listening to me, or you might be staring at me, nodding your head, but thinking about anything else in the world, right? But I promise you that if you try speaking about one thing and thinking about something else, it just doesn't work. I can't talk to you about interview questions and how to master the art of interviewing at the same time be thinking about the Yankees or something. It just doesn't work that way. So that's why I really try to push people to as much as possible, get the interviewer to do as much of the talking. Get them to be as engaged as possible. Ask them questions about the business, about the industry. Ask them questions that get them totally engaged in what you have to say. Now, a word of warning, I guess. Please, whatever you do not disagree with the interviewer. If you ask a question that engages them in a way that they're giving an opinion that you disagree with, try to sidestep that. You can disagree with them after after you get hired over a beer or something, but don't necessarily go against what they have to say. Really try to swallow that as best as you can. But the key thing here, and in my opinion, the most important step in this process is really to ask some questions that are designed to really get the conversation flowing. That is the central thing. All right. Now, between the sound going back in and out and a couple other little issues, um, what kind of what kind of questions based on this now? I mean, does it make sense to you that you would ask these sort of questions in the interview? Maybe I'll ask some of you guys specifically. I mean, is it something where when you ask a question, are you asking it because you really care about the answer? Are you asking it just to get them to be talking? Are why do you feel that, or in fact, why do you think they ask if you have any questions? Do you really think that they want to continue engaging? I mean, what's your opinion about this whole, do you have any questions for me? Go ahead and throw something in the chat box there. Now, while you're doing that, one other thing I wanted to mention, there's always a couple of questions that do tend to pop up in an interview, right? That people sort of cringe when they hear it. For example, one of them might be, Mark, tell me about yourself. Now, when I hear that, and when I hear when people answer that question, what do? Well, what they usually start doing when they hear, tell me about yourself, is they start walking through their background. Well, I was born as a small child and I grew up to be a man and I had a couple of jobs and I went to college and then I did this and I did that and they go through everything as if the interviewer really cares. But they don't. They don't. They really don't necessarily. They just don't know what else to ask sometimes, right? I mean, you'll get these people that ask a lot of these questions, strengths and weaknesses, etc., that are just sort of filler stuff, right? But if you do get asked the question, tell me about yourself, in my opinion, the best way to answer that is to have maybe a 2 or 3 sentence, almost like a greatest hits, sort of a marketing pitch where you might say, well, as you may have seen from my background, for the past 20 years, I've been increasing the revenue of publishing firms by expanding their customer base. And I'm looking to bring that expertise into a firm that's really progressive in their thought process on how to do that. Now, I've done that for quite a long time, but in looking at my resume, is there anything specific you'd like me to talk about? Now, what you're doing there is you're sort of talking about the highlights of what you're bringing to the table, and especially bringing the stuff to the table that pertains to that position. But then, best of all, you're saying, look, as you can tell, I've done a lot in my career. Is there anything specific that you'd like me to talk about? Because, quite frankly, I promise you that the person interviewing you is not interested in everything you've done. They really don't care. I can't imagine they go home at night and say, you know, I'd love to know if John's, thing he did back 22 years ago at Bank of Norway was, no, they don't care. They just don't care. So instead, make sure you answer it by saying, look, is there anything specific? Because invariably they'll say, well, yeah, actually, I'm curious to know about your experience 3 years ago at Morgan Stanley, because a good friend of mine used to work in that group, Nancy Jones. Do you know Nancy? Oh, yeah, actually, I do. Blah, 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 blah. And then you're off and running. But see, that's the thing, is that they really maybe only have 1 or 2 things they want to talk about, but they don't know really how to do that. So whenever you hear that from now on, tell me about yourself. Just have a little short value statement about what you bring to the table, and then say, look, is there anything specific about my background that you'd want me to talk about, right? Another question might be, and I'm sure you've heard this before, where do you see yourself in the next 3 or 4 years? How do I'm going to throw it. I'd like you to just put something real quickly in the chat box of, if someone asks you, where do you see yourself in the next, 3 or 4 years? How do you think you'd answer that? Now, while you're doing that, and if you're doing that, um, I see one of the comments is that yeah, for some of the interviews, especially at the end of the interview, a lot of these interviewers might say, they might ask a bunch of questions, but because they just want to see and hear what you say and how you think and what your sort of logical process is. And you're absolutely right. So, in my opinion, a lot of the questions you'll get are not necessarily concerned about how you answer it or what you answer. I mean, I'm sorry, what your answer is, but more importantly, how you answer it, right? I've heard some of the questions before, like, for example, um, I once heard that somebody like to ask, well, how many blades of grass are, on a football field? A specific one, whatever. I guess it'd be cheating to say Giant Stadium because it's really not grass. But, how many blades of grass? Well, they know that you're not going to know the answer specifically to that. But if you walk through them, the processes of how you might figure that out, it might be, for example, that that if you look at a square foot of grass, you'll see that there might be an estimate of, I don't know, whatever it is, 500 blades of grass, and then you determine how many square feet are on the football field and you're off and running there. It might be something as simple as that. But again, it's all about how you go about thinking, right? So in terms of, where do you answer and how do you answer, where do you see yourself in the next 3 or 4 years? In my opinion, I like to throw questions like that back on the interviewer because look, there's no right answer, right? If you say, for example, well, gee, I just really want to work hard and see where it lands me, blah, right? Or they might say, gee, I'd love to have your job, or I'd love to be in this sort of a role. Well, we just don't know what they're looking for when they ask that question and what the right answer is. So what I do instead is I might respond back by saying, I'm glad you asked me that question because I've got a few different ideas, but I'm curious to know from your perspective, where can someone in this position be in the next few years? What are some of the options available? And throw it back at them. It's such an asinine question. But if you throw it back at them, they will tell you, well, look, honestly, in 3 or 4 years doing this job, you can maybe get into risk management or more of a straight credit role or more of a direct analyst role, or you might be able to move in towards legal, whatever it might be. But they'll tell you what your options are. And it's going to be it's really going to be helpful for you to know that sort of thing. And then what you can do is just simply say, wow, those all sound like pretty good opportunities. That's something I'll definitely keep in mind. Whatever you do, try not to commit yourself to a specific answer because look, a lot of times they'll bait you with a specific question also. It's funny. I used to hear the question all the time when I'd place people in banking. They would ask the candidate, well, you want to be a trader someday, right? And invariably, it's the way they asked it. People would say, well, yeah, that'd be awesome. And the next thing that people would say is, well, that's not going to happen here. We don't hire people from your area into trading, but thanks anyway. And you're screwed, right? So that's why it's essential to really come back with questions. And obviously you don't want to do that with every question they ask you to, respond back, well, what do you think? Or, what's your opinion on that and so on. But make sure that your questions, some of these questions can be thrown back at them. But look, best of all is that you'll avoid a lot of these questions especially the stupid ones, in my opinion, if you start asking them questions that engage them in a conversation. All right. So let's see. I'm going to just jump into a couple of quick questions here. Yeah, look, one of the questions is, even if it's an asinine question, is it possible that will they think that you're trying to avoid it, you're not answering the question and so on? Well, not if you follow it up again by saying something like wow, those sound like great options. Or, look, you can even say, I might consider leaning towards blank, A, B, or C, but they can't expect you to give them a response of where you expect to be in 3 or 4 years based on what they just told you. So, as long as you're not coming off as someone who's sidestepping all the questions. I mean, you are answering some of them, but again, the soonest you can convert the interview into a discussion about the business, because look, we all know that if people are brought in for an interview, there's 8 people brought in, there's a real good chance that the people are, they already are qualified for the job. They already know how to do it. So yeah, maybe there's some nuances that the person may not know. So maybe the interviewer might be all excited to ask some specifics about a certain process or a certain product. But generally, the person that gets the offer is the one that's qualified to do the job to an extent, but really the most liked, right? The person that the other person feels most comfortable with. That's the best fit. And fit can mean, not just having all the requirements for the job, but really having the right personality. I mean, you're going to be working next to this person for 8, 10, or 12 hours a day. So they're going to want to hire someone that they want to hang around with, that they want sitting over there, that they can rely on, that they know there's going to be a positive person. And we talked about the positive thing earlier. Someone who's going to be articulate, but not to the point where they keep blabbing. So someone who's brief and to the point, right? And someone who can listen. And someone who knows, and who actually will ask like opinions and want to know what other people think. That's a great quality, not just a quality of a sort of a worker bee kind of thing, but also of a leader. A strong leader always asks questions, always wants to know more, right? So today I've tried to jam in the last 45 minutes or so as much as I could about these three critical steps. Um, I think that I've touched on almost everything, but again, as a reminder, the first step is to really anticipate what the hiring manager is looking for and write down all the qualities, skills, and so on that you would want to hire for that position if you were that hiring manager. And then step two is to look at your own background and really try to ask yourself, is there anything in my career and my background and my resume that I really need to be prepared for, to answer? Is there anything that I need to sort of cover my rear on? And then the third part, and to me, again, one of the most important ones, is to really have 2 or 3 questions prepared in advance, not written down, but just ones that, you shouldn't have trouble remembering an industry related question. If it's something that you're walking into a position that requires industry knowledge, you already have that knowledge. So you might want to ask them a question about how something might be impacted by something and what's their opinion. Make sure, though, that when you ask these questions, that you're asking ideally a positive question. Don't say, I see your company lost 8.2 billion last quarter. What's up with that? Not a good plan. But if you say, look, I see that the company's considering growing into South America, especially the forestry products in Brazil. What's your thought of that? Well, then you're off and running, because you're talking about growth and positive and a moves. Now, the person might say, well, you know what? I think it's a ridiculous idea, because we're going to find that the products that we get down there are inferior to what we can get here, and blah 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 blah. You can say, oh, I can see that. That's interesting, right? And this person's going to say, wow, this person might actually be able to back me on the fact that I think it's an idiotic idea. Again, what you want to do with this whole interview is emerge from it where the person is saying, wow, I can totally see this person, this man, this woman next to me, having my back, coming to my defense, kind of a thing. But on top of that, just always being a positive, the positive attitude thing is so essential, because look, we all know people that tend to look at the cup half empty, right? And so in this case here, the cup half full, it's going to rub off on the other people. And that's something that's really important to me as a manager. Look, if I'm going to hire you, I want you to make me look good. Again, it's so funny. When people say, well, gee, what's that manager looking for? It's really actually pretty simple. If I'm the hiring manager, what do I want to do? Well, if that seat is empty because someone just left to go somewhere else, I want to replace it with somebody who's going to be positive, do the job right, do it right the first time, and best of all, make me look good. That's really what I want. Now, I'm not going to say that publicly or out loud and so on, but yeah, I want this person to make me look good. And I also want them to probably take as much work off my plate as possible. That's the whole point here. Okay. So, a couple things to keep in mind. And this is one of the last slides here, because this is something I really wanted to talk about. Positive impressions are, again, the first, last, and only ones that get you into the next round of interviewing. What I mean by that is that, look, again, without beating the dead horse, people are going to always look at and listen to what you've said and remember the positive stuff, but they'll also remember negative stuff. Whatever you do not badmouth anybody or any place that you've been, because invariably you'll find out that that person knows somebody else at that company, and they'll say, wait a minute, no, that guy Rick is not really a jerk. I like him. He's a good guy. So maybe you're the jerk, right? So be careful. Never, ever badmouth. Always spin things in a positive way. How many times have we been seeing over the last few months all these politicians and the debates and so on, where everything gets spun into a positive light by the politician? The analysts and so on, and all the talking heads will turn it into a negative way, I guess, but the politicians are best at turning things into a positive light. Try to work on that for the interview process, right? And of course, you know, when I say be clear to the manager that you're capable of meeting the job objectives, I think that they're going to get that sense as you go through the meeting and the interview, as you speak about the business and the industry, right? And they'll get a feel that, you know what, even if it might be clear that you might lack a specific skill that maybe the other 7 have, this person's going to say, well, look, you know, John can figure that out. John can pick that up. He's a smart guy. Even if he doesn't have it now, I'll be able to teach him that. I love this guy's attitude. He's a great guy to be around. He's, he makes everybody else feel at ease. I don't care that John lacks something because I can teach him that. And look, one thing I can tell you as a recruiter is that I've placed over the last 25 years, I've placed probably a couple hundred people that going in lacked more of the requirements than most of their competition. They maybe had, 50 or 60%, that's it. But I was so confident of their personality and the way they carried themselves and the way they spoke that I was convinced that they'd have a great shot at getting the offer. And they usually did because they asked the right questions. They kept the conversation flowing. They anticipated everything that the hiring manager might want. They were ready for any questions that they might get about their own backgrounds. And that's how they did well. And that's how you'll do well also. So I've thrown a lot at you in the last, 45 minutes or so. What any other questions that you might have before I go to the next step here? Go ahead and throw it in the box. Now, I'm going to skip a few slides because I wanted to, what I want to do is really get to the end and talk to you about, one of the upcoming webinars I've got. I mentioned that last, but it's coming in a couple of weeks. And again, it's all about not only now that you've done well in this interview process, but how to follow up. What is really the right time to follow up with people you haven't heard, you're dying to hear how you did in the interview, and it's frustrating because you just don't know why you haven't heard any feedback back, right? I mean, that drives me bananas. But a lot of times, especially recruiters, they don't get around to it, or the hiring managers don't answer, right? So, to me, it's essential to know how to follow up after your interview and what's going to have the best and the most positive reflection of your candidacy. Okay. Secondly, is how do you start the whole process of negotiating a potential offer and your salary? Now, that's really something that gets most people uncomfortable because, look, conceptually, I feel perfectly comfortable talking about something else or buying something else or doing, but when it's about me, it gets a lot harder, right? I mean, how many times have you gone to the car dealer and tried to buy a car, and suddenly you start haggling, and it's uncomfortable when it's doing that. So what I'll be doing in the next webinar, minus all these issues and so forth, some of the technical stuff, is I'm going to be talking to you about how to follow up with people and do it in a way that makes your candidacy really stand out. And we're also going to talk about how to negotiate salary, how to negotiate benefits, and how to really get ready to receive an offer, or more importantly, receive several offers. Okay. I'm going to leave this open for another minute or so if you've got any further questions. And one other thing, I'm going to skip ahead a couple slides because I want to show you. Let me do it this way here, where here we go. Whoops. The next webinar. So as you know, I charge a specific amount for these webinars. When you're an attendee, you do get a chance to get $30 off. I mean, look, even the $97, I know it's a significant investment, but quite frankly, it's just sort of a fraction of what most people will charge for an hour of direct one-on-one coaching. But I appreciate that you've gone through this, and it's. I hope I've presented a lot of value to you. My feeling is that doing well in the interview itself is critical to landing the job that you really want, right? So I'm not going to necessarily put an offer button in the chat box to the right. What I'm going to do instead is there's the link right here. I will send you the link separately. You don't need to worry about doing things within 20 minutes. But I will grant you that all you need to do going forward is just put the code word attendee in when you register, and you'll get the next webinar at $67 instead of the $97 price. So here we go. Now, a great question I just see before I jump off. Should you customize your interview approach based on who's interviewing you, whether it's HR, department director, etc.? Brilliant question, because the answer is yes, but no. Obviously, when you're speaking to HR, you're not going to be necessarily asking them, about, a change of interest rates in Europe and that sort of thing. But even better, if you ask them, if you say something like, wow, I see that, the unemployment rate is supposedly 4.9%, but it still seems like we're in a bit of a recession, and I know lots and lots of people that aren't getting hired. So, Mr. or Miss HR person, what's your impression of what the real scope of employment is out there? And how does that relate to how hiring is going on here at your company? Oh my God. You want to talk about the question that will make them absolutely love you? Because if you think about it, and this is unfortunate, but most people tend to kind of sidestep HR's significance, right? They sort of say, oh, well, they're just, kind of like they're in the process, but they don't necessarily make or break things. And, they'll just ask you a lot of the standard stuff. But if you get them engaged in a conversation about what they know and love, you are going to score so many points with them, because I promise you, nobody else that they interview is asking them a question about hiring trends in the market today. Nobody. Promise. So if you focus on asking questions that really cover whoever it is, whoever you're talking to, ask them a question about something that they're an expert at. I'm telling you, you will earn huge points if you do that, and it'll put you ahead a lot of your competition. And that HR person, they may or may not have a lot of impact in the hiring decision, but if they have any impact at all, I promise you they're going to push for your candidacy just based on that. It's absolutely true. When you show people that you are interested in what they have to say and how they say it and what their opinions are, suddenly you jump to the head of the line. So I hope that that helped answer your question. All right, so I'm going to jump off in a second. I really appreciate all of you, your patience, and all of you from being here. And I look forward to our next one, where we will, I've already talked about the topic and so on, but look, if you have any separate questions, please feel free to send me a note, send me an email. I'd be delighted to answer them. I really appreciate you being here. I wish you the absolute best of luck in your interviews going forward. I'm sure that if you implement some of these tips and strategies you've heard today, that you'll do really well in the process. So this is me exiting out. Again, thanks again for your time, and have a wonderful evening. And I'll still stay in here for another minute or so if you have any last minute questions. Thanks again, and have a great evening.